All right, so I think we are ready to start our first session at SEEDIG. A bit of an explanation. If you have taken a look at our website, we have the objectives of SEEDIG listed there, and one of the objectives is capacity building and awareness raising on internet governance. And you will see this in this session, especially. Some of you might have attended the first SEEDIG meeting last year. We had a similar introductory session, and we kind of felt the need that we need to do it again. And it was not only us. We had a survey, an internet governance survey, which we started in early March. Some of you have filled that in, so thank you for that. And some of the results of that survey told us that there is still need for capacity building and awareness raising on internet governance in our region. So this is why we have this first session, during which we will look again into what is internet governance, how does it work, what are the stakeholders, and what is happening in the region when it comes to internet governance. We have 4 key participants with us today, and I will just briefly introduce them. Frédéric Donck from the Internet Society, one of our supporting organization and sponsors. Chris Buckridge from RIPE Network Coordination Center, again, one of the supporter and sponsors. Markus Kummer, IGF Support Association, the same story. And Andrea Beccalli, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, again, supporting organization and sponsor for SEEDIG. Thank you all for joining us today. And I think we can go directly into the session and look a bit into the internet governance ecosystem generally, and then go down to the region and see what is happening here. So let's start with what is internet governance. Can we have the presentation, please? It's coming, hopefully. All right, while that is happening, this is the survey I was telling you about. We were trying through it to basically understand a bit how you, the internet community in the region, see internet governance. And one of the questions was, how would you define internet governance? Okay, let me take the lead on this as well. And this is what you told us. These are the key words that we extracted from your responses, from your definitions of internet governance. And if you look at it, it's pretty interesting, because we have words like regulation and at the same time multi-stakeholder. We have procedures and rules. We have stakeholders again and dialogue. So it's a sort of a combination between regulation and cooperation. This is what you told us. Now my question to everyone in the room, because yes, not all of you have filled in the survey, would you agree with any of these words as defining internet governance? Would you add any other word to this word cloud? One quick word, internet governance. I would kindly ask for some raise of hands. If not, I have this bad habit of just going with the mic at people, so it's basically your choice. Any of these words sound like internet governance to you, or would you add something else? One hand, please. All right, Peter, what do you think?
Probably all these words, and probably some words is missing, because the multi-stakeholder or this internet governance field is so broad and so big that, well, it's really hard to define it, and that's we are probably discussing now.
What would be that word, Angela?
Discussing, talking to each other.
All right, someone else, I'm coming.
Hi, Valentina. Okay. As a visual impaired, I find the rights too small for my taste, and this is our fault. I would say gender. I think in internet governance we need gender. We need diversity, diversity of voices, diversity of people, diversity of colors. The Southeast Europe maybe is too wide, but I think that the European space is wider, and we should have a wealth of diversity to have a real governance, I would say, for, from, and with the people.
Thank you, Valentina. So diversity and gender. Something else? Please. Tanya?
Well, I will also say diversity.
All right. And one final word. Who is the lucky one? Oh, okay, thank you. You have the mic.
I think that internet governance is really built on consensus. Consensus between all the stakeholders. So my word is consensus.
All right, thank you. So we have new words that we should add to this cloud. Thank you all for contributing. Let's go to our key participants. And the same question would be to you, basically. What is internet governance? How would you define it? And let's be a bit more specific, looking into actual internet governance issues, principles, maybe a bit of the history of the concept. Markus, if you would like to start with that.
Thank you. Well, I was going to say, I like the way the discussion is going. We don't have to say anything. It doesn't go that way. Well, let me start by thanking you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I think all these words are fairly relevant, very relevant to the concept of internet governance. From my point of view, I cannot see human rights, and I would like to add that to the cluster of words. Now, I think the dialogue has come across. It's very important. The collaboration is very important. The multi-stakeholder aspect is very important. The participation on an equal footing is very important. And essentially, the way internet governance evolved is very adapted to the underlying distributed technology. There's no single organization in charge, but it is a collaboration between many organizations, and some of them are represented here on this panel. But obviously, it goes beyond the technical coordination. There are the aspects, the societal aspects related to internet governance that are not dealt with by any single organization, and there is the issue of a cross-border application of rules. The internet as a borderless technology clashes with the system we have built, the international system, since the Westphalian peace treaties, which are based on national sovereignties. And we have not found any solution to that, but we are struggling how to adapt. And the internet governance dialogue we have in the Internet Governance Forum, in the national and regional initiatives, is precisely based on sharing experiences, learning from each other, sharing best practices to find common solution. Well, that's, I think, all for now as an introductory statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. Frédéric, would you want to continue?
Absolutely, thank you. Also, thank you for inviting us and me to address this audience this morning. Well, as Markus said, I quite like what I see. I kind of agree with one of the people in the audience saying consensus. I see consensus is very little at the right side of the screen, and I would have given it much more visibility and importance. There are different words in approach that looks like they are contradictory. And so I would like to say something about governance, multi-stakeholderism, and multilateralism. And this is something that those days people used to oppose, saying it's either one or the other. And I believe you need to consider that they can both go together quite well. So what we start seeing, and I later in the day, later in this panel, I know that one of my duty is to give some concrete example of where it works, so I won't go there now because I know you will ask me the question. But what is important to see is that you see a lot of different multilateral organizations who start implementing a multi-stakeholder approach, and it meshes quite well with their objective. It gives them much more credibility, much more expertise. So when I see regulation, when I see multilateralism, and when I see governance, I mean, those are not contradicting per se. So that is something I would like to say at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you also. Chris?
So yeah, first thank you, as Frédéric said, for the invitation to be here. I think it's really useful, and it's great to have such a good audience here to participate. I like this approach actually, because I think building on a bit on what Frédéric said, the sheer number of different words, I think, really showcases that internet governance is not one thing. It's really a very useful construction that we have now to say internet governance, but in some ways an artificial construction, because it brings together a lot of related but quite different processes under one umbrella. In that vein, I see evolution is there. I'd probably add in dynamic, which I don't see as a word there, because what we've seen over time is the sort of evolution of an approach to internet governance which really is dynamic and needs to sort of meet the different needs of different stakeholders at different times. Yeah, there are examples. I think Andrea is going to talk a bit about the IANA stewardship, but it's the example that springs to mind of a sort of a new model or a new innovation that sort of reflects that, you know, we're facing a variety of different challenges with internet governance, and we're having to build solutions somewhat on the fly, but obviously building from the experiences we've had in the past. So that's a really fundamental need for us in internet governance, to be dynamic, to be willing to evolve.
Thank you. We have some pretty good new words that we should add to our cloud. Maybe after this session we can work on that and show it at the end. Andrea?
Yeah, thank you, Sorina, and thank you for having me here. So now I'm challenged to say something smart after that the whole room was inquired about what is internet governance and an amazing panel. So I'll try. At first, even looking now, internet governance put like that, it may seem like an oxymoron, like the two words together that don't really match. And probably that's one of the biggest challenges that we have experienced so far, that we had to disentangle these oxymorons and put some clarity in that. And we at ICANN, and we will go later into what we do, we've been struggling with that quite for a while, and I think something that would be helpful is in your bags that you just took at the entrance. If you look into that, there is a printout slide with the 3 layers of digital governance. And internet governance most likely applies to all 3 layers, but with different dynamics, with different roles and actors, and different challenges. So when we do look at the logical layer, the technical layer, we do have some key principles of bottom-up, multi-stakeholder, equal footing participation. And those are the principles that, since when the internet was invented, guided the development of this technology. But as soon as this technology becomes something that shapes and basically encompasses all our aspects of our lives, those principles have to be dealt with. And I will challenge you. Now the big talk in Brussels is this opening of an investigation against Google dominant position in the Android market. So they bundle the services into the Android mobile phones. Is that an internet governance issue, or is it a competition law issue? I wouldn't be so clear-cut in saying, no, just traditional competition law, we will deal with that. So we will keep dealing with this challenge, and I think we'll keep dealing with the challenge of a definition that will keep evolving, because we are looking at something that is extremely complex, and it's important to figure out where we place ourselves. So if you have time to look into the printout, you will see all what we have been saying now and what probably was into the word cloud. It reflects quite well what we mean for internet governance at the logical layer. But when we move one layer up or one layer down, things kind of start to change. And the big challenge for the coming years is to understand how to deal with that, how to deal with this environment that is indeed shaping and reshuffling our principles, our economic trends, our ways of interacting to each other, but at the same time it's also the way where we define and structure governance. So I hope that was smart enough, and challenge me now on that.
It was. Thank you, Andrea. And thank you all for the introductions. I will go back to the room with the next question in our list of questions for this session. And that's pretty simple, and it's related to what has been already said. Who governs the internet? And again, I will ask for one quick word from you. Any hands? who governs the internet? Yes, Vlada.
Now you immediately start with $1 million question. I'm not sure yet. It's quite specific for this region particularly, because my impression, at least in this region, is that when it comes to governance, it's usually about governments. And if we compare the words, well, I don't know in all the languages, but those Serbian, Bosnian, Croatian, Montenegrin, and so on, we don't actually have. I mean, we have the word for governance, but it really associates or mentally with the government, and let alone these kind of phrases like multi-stakeholder. That's really complex. So here, I think it would still be governments to a large extent when it comes to digital policies. But let's see if this can help to at least shape the policies in a more inclusive way with other stakeholders.
Thank you, Vlada. And Zdravko, since I'm here.
Thanks, Sorina. Yes, I agree what Vlada just said. So, because I'm representing government side, and what is very important for me is to hear also the other stakeholders. And when we try to shape policy through, for example, GAC, within ICANN, it is very important for us who are representing governments there to know what other stakeholders in our countries think about particular issues. So it is a complex issue. Yes, thanks for now.
Thank you also. All right, so we have governments and governments listening to other stakeholders. Anyone else?
It's a difficult question. I don't know. Yes, I agree, but I know it's a very difficult question.
Hello. Every time I hear the words internet governance, I cannot help myself and avoid thinking also about internet ownership, right? Ownership of networks, technologies, R&D centers. One of the previous participants mentioned it's a multi-stakeholder approach. It has to remain that way. But it has to be process-driven and with a long-term thinking ahead. And all partners really should participate.
Is it working? So I think that if we are talking about who governs, I want to relate what Vlada just told. I think that it's generally about perception. How do we perceive the governance? So if we are talking about the governments governing the internet, maybe it's how governments think about this, because they're thinking in terms of regulation or something like this. But if we are talking about who is running the internet, including infrastructure, including services, I don't think that there would be governments, because in most of the countries in the region, this sector is either liberalized if it's related to telecom, or it's hands-off regulation in any case. So if we are thinking regulation-wise, it wouldn't be the governance, but it would be perception of the governments. But if we are thinking who really runs it and who really kind of responsible for this, I don't think it's really governments. Do they probably want to keep control on this?
Thank you, Tanya. Anyone else? Did we have more hands? No, then I'm going back to our key participants. But before that, because I've just heard we have comments on Twitter that our panel is not gender balanced. Yes, we are aware of that, but we have so many smart women in the audience and they will all contribute to this session. Just to make everyone more or less happy on this note. And going back to, again, our key participants, this is what our room said. Some of them were referring to government as governing the internet, and others were talking about multi-stakeholder. And I think, Chris, you want to chime in directly.
Well, I had what I thought sounded like a very intelligent and interesting comment about this, and Tanya's actually said pretty much word for word what I was going to say there. I think it is really important in thinking about governance to try and break out of that idea that it is all about regulation, because if what you're thinking is regulation, then naturally the government is going to be the key player. So for an example, I think earlier this week in Tirana, down in Albania, there was the Southeast European meeting. The RIPE NCC actually runs this as a sort of technical group for operators in the region to share information, share technical ideas, concepts, and to talk also a bit about sort of the issues that RIPE NCC is involved in. So that's primarily IP addressing issues, leading into policy discussions, that sort of thing. And that's part of governance, internet governance. That's operators who are actually responsible for the infrastructure, for the networks in the region, coming together to discuss how they operate those networks, how they work together, what coordination there can be. And that's really an important aspect as well. And I think one of the earlier speakers also then spoke about the need to connect those different stakeholder groups. So I mean, I think the kind of information, the kind of discussion that's happening in that C5 meeting, and that it happens every year, this was the 5th one, it's really important that the GAC members, for one example, but only one example, the GAC members in this region be aware of those discussions and what's coming out of that, because I think that's really important to inform the decisions that they're going to go into in the GAC and in other contexts.
You mentioned GAC, that's an acronym, and maybe Andrea would be the best to explain it.
Yeah. So the GAC is the Governmental Advisory Committee, and it's where governments actually participate and in the ICANN model. And governments are one of the stakeholder groups that makes and shapes the policies for the management of the logical layer, the DNS layer. We'll go into more details in that. And they played an extremely important role in ICANN. And probably ICANN, it's an interesting model because it's one of the few or the only global organization that deals with a model where governments are part of the process, but they are not the only one in shaping and making the decision at the end. And that's something that it not always works smoothly, but it works, and it's an experiment in the making. And probably the other interesting thing is that it's an open experiment. Everybody can look into this. It's really going to an ICANN meeting, and you can literally look into the lab and see how governments discuss an environment that is not the traditional international environment where each government goes there, puts his own flag, and everybody else is outside, and they take the decision because they represent the whole country. And this model, as I said, is evolving, is now in a particular key point in time, because for many years we at ICANN claimed that this was the perfect model, but we were hiding one little thing, that among all the governments participating in ICANN, one had a particular peculiar role. And although it was a nominal clerical role, indeed was a role that none of the other 197, or I don't know how many recognized countries we have now, had. And that created some fallacy into the system, into the logical reasoning of the system. And we finally are getting beyond that to make this whole model completely independent, and to make governments, at least among them, all the same. And then they participate into this process. I know I'm getting into some probably esoteric parts of the internet governance, but well, that's how it goes when you ask ICANN about the roles of governments.
Thank you, Andrea. Frédéric, who governs the internet, and also tell us a bit about Internet Society and what the organization does in internet governance. And we will go afterwards into the multi-stakeholder examples.
Okay, thank you, Sorina. Well, first, what I was about to say is that governments are an important stakeholders. There were some, attempt in the past to just resist and say that governments should do nothing about the internet, but they are an important parties. They are not the only one, and And there is a good reason when we talk about the internet is composed of what, 60,000 autonomous systems. Most of them are private. So you might have decisions taken by the government, but they just don't own most of the networks. So this is where actually it's interesting to see that intergovernmental organizations start one by one to endorse a multi-stakeholder process. So it started in 2008 with the OECD, then 2009 with the Council of Europe, then the ITU in 2010, then the G8 in 2011, and finally the WSIS in 2015. So it's quite interesting to see that the most intergovernmental organizations now start recognizing that if you want impact in things like the internet that doesn't belong to anyone, you need to endorse a principle that goes beyond government. So that's what I wanted to say. So about ISOC, yes, I could easily say what we do. We home to the IETF, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force. Pretty well everything that we do on the internet has been standardized. So there are engineers, a community which, by the way, function within those principles, following clearly those principles of openness, inclusiveness. Anybody here in this room might come, and I invite you to the next IETF, just registered and come to Berlin, 3rd week of July, so I'll launch the invitation. So that is really our core business. We're home to that manufacturing, I would say, independent manufacturing, and then we extended our activities to policy and development. Thank you.
Heard so far about governments as actors in internet governance and also technical community with ISOC, RIPE and ICANN, just mentioning about them. We have other actors, right? Markus?
Thank you. Well, let me go back to the question who governs the internet. And I think what came out of the discussion was pretty clear. The fact is nobody does, or except it's a collaborative effort, and I think that's important. And the internet governance, maybe I should start by actually a disclosure. I'm also a board member of ICANN, but I'm not here in the capacity as board member of ICANN, so I don't feel obliged to adhere to exactly what Andrea says, although I think we do sing from the same hymn sheet. But he did say there was an apparent oxymoron between internet and governance, and that has been with us from the beginning of the discussion on internet governance, especially in the US. The technical community said, what is this internet governance? We don't need that. And they equated governance with government. But governance is meant to be, and I think Tatiana summed it up quite nicely. It's the summing of various processes and applications, and all that together forms the act of governing the internet, of steering, of making it work. It's not supposed to equate with governments. And we went through all that more than 10 years ago. We had the working group on internet governance that came up with a definition on internet governance. I never learned it by heart, but it means precisely that. It's some of different actions that make the internet works, and what is essential is it's based on multi-stakeholder cooperation. And I think that came out of this panel very nicely. Now, we have the key technical organizations here on this panel. I mean, Frédéric speaking for the IETF. These are the protocol parameters. And Chris for the numbers. They are essentials, and Andrea for the names. And together, that makes the internet work. But of course, there's more than that, and there are other actors involved. And I think the IGF brings them all together, brings in civil society, and at the opening speeches that was also mentioned, we need civil society, we need the academics, we need also the business community to add their voice, and of course we do need governments, and all together is this beautiful effort of collaborative internet governance.
So again, we've heard about the technical community and governments, and I would go to the room to look at civil society and the private sector, the actors we don't have on the stage. Can I see a show of hands, civil society representatives in the room? All right, that's not too much. Yes, civil society representatives in the room. Anyone would like to tell us something about your role as actors in internet governance? Because from the hands I saw, you are all actually participating in internet governance. Any show of hand? If not, again, I will come with the mic, so it's your choice. Bogdan, I am next to you, so.
I think that internet users in general are key to internet and are key to internet governance. So I think it's natural for internet users to participate in direct forms as through civil society organizations. So I think that's it, because the others are all indirect, participating through, for example, parliament representatives or governments that have been elected through some kind of democratic process, hopefully. So, yeah, I think that the civil society organizations are the most direct representative of internet users' interests, especially in relation with their rights.
Thank you, Bogdan. Anyone else from civil society?
Wait a second. His name or her name. Because yes, please say the name.
Yeah, please. I'm new to the community. I don't know a lot of people here, so it would be very good for us newcomers that everyone say at least his or her name, maybe something about himself or herself, if it is suitable or not. I don't know. I'm for the first time in such kind of meeting. Thank you. My name is Tasic. Sorry.
And you represent?
I represent myself. Sorry, I'm just a part of the history of the internet in this area, so I like to come to such kind of meetings to see how the things are going on.
And thank you for coming.
Sorina.
Anna, we had Valen.
No, one thing,
Yes.
actually, she just explained what ICANN does. You know? Otherwise, I was thinking, yeah, these are all IP numbers. And actually, she asked, what's your name? That's probably it.
Thank you, Andrea. Valentina, please. And yes, start with the introduction.
Okay, sorry, I don't want to be boring, but just, I would like to just maybe think of legitimacy. Because when you say you are civil society, I mean, it can be a formal group and informal group, but means also a civil society is not the voice of the people, has an agenda, represent. So what we really need are the users. But when we talk about the users, accessing places like this is not always easy. I mean, the reason why the SEEDIG is happening now in Belgrade is just because it's more near to the people. Internet is a virtual network, but also access to this virtual network is not easy because it's costly. And it's also mediated by platforms. And the platforms are owned, but in this case really owned by the big business. For me as a civil society, and the reason that moved our little group into the governance of the internet in the very national level and this regional more than the global one, was to shake a space that was very dormant and closed. This is a space of dialogue, and the Southeast Europe, the Balkans, Bosnia and Herzegovina, they really deserve a chance of a dialogue. A place where we can talk, dissent, but not being then pointing out or not to have, we have to agree. Because when you agree, then powers come into place, and civil society, citizens will always be the less powerful. But they are the basis of everything. Citizens are taxpayers, citizens are users, citizens are customers. So without the money of the little people, the big people cannot play the world. This for civil society. And I wanted just to point out about the gender dimension very shortly. I know that here and in general there are a lot of women and expertise. But I think also that we all, as organization, as institution, need to find mechanisms to make sure that the person that talk, even if they are the top of an organization and they are a male, yes, of course they are competent, but there are competent women too. This is a way of a strategy, politics, and giving a sign. Because we know that there are women inside the room, behind the scene, in the scene. But I think it's an issue of politics showing solidarity and giving the seat. And this is a thing that we have to do. I mean, in my organization, which is super small and mainly women, it's easy. But the challenge is shared. I mean, I'm part of a system that reproduces the stereotype, so I'm just not calling myself out.
Thank you. And that was Valentina Pelitzer from One Word Platform doing the introduction. I have one.
Thank you. Yeah, I will. I'm Auke Pals from Youth Representative from the Netherlands. In the first round, when the question was asked, who governs the internet? I heard a lot of people saying, oh, the government runs the internet. But we, as in a democracy, we as civilians, citizens, we vote for the government. So we can rule the government, actually. We govern the government. So if we disagree with something, the government has to obey us. The same with all the platforms we use, like Facebook, like every platform we use. If we disagree with something that's going on there and all leave the platform, the platforms will change their mind and will change their strategy. So I think we as users, as civil society, govern everything. Thank you.
Tatiana Tropina, I'm representing Max Planck Institute, but I'm also a member of non-commercial users constituency at the ICANN. So about civil society and users, I mean, it's an interesting debate. It also takes place in the ICANN context, like who is the best representing the interests of non-commercial users or non-commercial organizations or of civil society. Would it be civil society group or end users? And I believe both, because in a way there are two levels where I see the influence. One of them is, let's say, ICANN, who is ruling and running the internet. And it's always like the voice of civil society is somewhere between the politics, the governments, and the voices of big businesses. And this is why it is so important, for example, for the ICANN to have NCUC and ALAC users constituencies, non-commercial users constituencies, and end user constituencies. But the second level and much bigger level is not who is running the internet in this global context. It's also how it goes on the national and regional level. And here civil society has even a bigger role in terms of politics and governmental power, because it's the whole layer of regulation, of interaction, of intervention. And that's where civil society plays a bit different role compared to be a voice between politics and business. Civil society in this sense plays role in promoting human rights, promoting also end users' interests, because end users probably will not participate on the national level of the governance. They will at the ICANN, but not on the national and regional level. And that's why civil society plays even more prominent role.
Can I say something? Go ahead. And I think you're right, Tatiana, because if we look at national IGFs, most of the time they are organized by civil society organizations. So civil society has somehow, in practical terms, has taken over the role of creating this platform where they try to bring private, governmental, academia, technical people together. So basically they are actors as well as mediators. And I very much like and encourage every civil society representative, organizations or individuals to continue being a mediator in between of different stakeholders, especially private and government. So that's a perfect role you can take over as a civil society. So I'm sorry I've taken microphone from you. Beck.
Can I have my Okay, Irina Rizmal, Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies. Just to add on what NGOs can do, sometimes the government and the industry can't find a common language, and sometimes it's hard for them to reach agreements because there are sensitive topics that one or the other side don't want to open, and this is where civil society can come and tackle these hard issues and open and push for solutions. And also civil society can keep the idea of public-private partnership in focus, which the government side sometimes forgets, but it's necessary to decide on governing such complex areas. Irina.
Thank you.
Also, before I give you, I feel there is a need of explaining the panel. So let me introduce myself. I am Anna, I'm focal point of this session. And just to explain ourselves, we tried a lot to balance this panel. We found incredible women from this sphere, from this region, who could be speaking, but either they were taken or they were busy by their business. It's very unfortunate, but this is a reality. So it's not on purpose, and we bring our apologies. Maybe we should have done more, but we really thought we did everything we could to balance it regionally and genderally. But this is what we got.
Bad, don't feel
which
bad,
is, I think, we think that reflects also the reality. There are few women, and those who are, they are busy. Those, it is indeed reality. So we are happy to have this panel as it is, because it's not fake and it's real. So voila, there you go. There is something to work on. Now we know. And
Thank
there
you,
was
Anna.
some hand here. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Nenad Marinkovic. I'm here now in front of association Plugin. It's, let's say, part of civil society. And I don't want to talk something that we already heard. I would like to say something that I see internet governance like maybe the main role is implementation of internet in offline life. Because I think that we see internet like independent state, independent world of offline world. It is the same people, the same users, the same civil society, the same business participant, and the same people who want to be a leader in this real world. So this is very important that all of us see that users and inhabitants are the most important part of the internet. The second thing that I want to say that this term, internet governance, it sounds so strong and so weak, because when you say to somebody that every multi-stakeholder is somebody who governs the internet, he can imagine that he is so strong and he is very important, more important than the others. But we are all the same in this game. We are all the authors of the internet content, and basically I can agree with Valentina that users basically invest the whole business, including internet, and all the leaders and whole society are in the role to help them to survive and to live better, not to be a leader like leaders. We are now in phase of election in Serbia. It's now maybe I don't need yes, it is silence time, but politicians think on civil society only in time of the election. And I don't want to imagine that the internet is something similar to real world. we should help to change real world and implementing internet technology, and maybe some rules that it is easier to implement on internet than in real life. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to give, I guess, a bit of an example, I think, to the point that Anna was making before about civil society also working with other stakeholders. And I think, so in the case of it, it's, I think, civil society organizations and civil society specific actors play a very important role in bringing some issues to the table, but then there are also others in other stakeholder groups to take up those points. And so a few RIPE meetings ago, a Dutch academic, Corinne Kath, actually presented some work that she'd done on the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, and the integration or reflection of human rights issues in the protocols themselves, the underlying technical protocols. And so that's something that's been brought into that field by, well, an academic in this case, and by civil society actors, but is then taken up by the technical people who are actually developing these protocols. So I think it's important that we not sort of put stakeholder groups in too much of in silos, that there be that interaction, because they're all going to need to work together to actually resolve or address the challenges that we have.
Thank you, Chris. This takes us very well to the next point in our discussion. Actual examples of where multi-stakeholder internet governance works. And Frédéric, finally. Yes, please.
Well, thank you. So we have some examples, actually, and we have contra-examples. What we can see already is that governance, the multi-stakeholder process, is not a single model or an all or nothing solution. It's just a set of practices, of behaviors with some strong criteria or strong behaviors. I mean, inclusiveness is one of them. Transparency, of course, is really an essential component. The evidence is whenever you see something untransparent at international level, from ACTA, if you remember ACTA, to TTIP, to whatever kind of high-level treaty that is intransparent, you can absolutely think that this is not a multi-stakeholder process, because transparency, inclusiveness is really key. But this is just that, a set of behavior best practices, and it's still evolving. It might just help finding solutions, it might just help improving institutions. So what is interesting to see, and this is why it works quite well with the internet, is that this process is good when things are extremely complex and interconnected. It works very well when you have different stakeholders in the impact, you have different stakeholders in the decision, and that any decision will impact those stakeholders. So for the internet, governments might take a decision, but the implementation of it will be mostly businesses and those guys who own the different networks. So practical example. I would certainly leave my ICANN colleagues here to talk about the INA transition, which was a blatant evidence of a multi-stakeholder process in action. But I will take another one. I would take the OECD. If you remember, in 2013, 2015, the OECD decided to review their security guidelines. And they did it. OECD is clearly an intergovernmental organization. They did it, and they tried, and they thought they should involve different stakeholders. So they asked trade unions, they asked businesses, they asked civil society, and they asked the technical community to join them. And it was great because what I just said about the criteria just were met here. I mean, they realized that security is just not something only technical, but this is a social and economic impact, hence the need to have different stakeholders. The goals were extremely clear. There were shared goals, there were a mutual respect on how to get there, there were clarity on the goals, there were transparency, there were a lot of practices that were put all together, which eventually came up to a very nice guidelines on security that all the stakeholders were agreeing with. So to me, this is one of the best examples. By the way, there were also states and governments from non-OECD who were called to join the effort. So it was really, for me, one of the most beautiful and effective multi-stakeholder in action. Thank you.
Thank you, Frédéric. Markus, yes.
Yes, thank you. If I can jump in here, and Frédéric prepared the terror nicely, and he said earlier on that the international organizations are not the same in 2015 as they were 10 years ago. I mean, they're much more open. They're much more open to participation of non-governmental actors, and I think here we have to give credit to the IGF that has opened the process as a truly multi-stakeholder organization where everybody participated on an equal footing. And what does it really mean? It's not just coming in every 4 years for the elections, but it's being part of a participatory democratic process. And the Internet organizations have been the trailblazers of that. All the Internet organizations, the RIRs, ICANN, the IETF, are open to participation. Whoever wants to participate can participate and go to the microphone. And this is totally different from the traditional world of governments, but it's interesting to see how this has sort of permeated also the international organization, the traditional intergovernmental organization. When you looked at the beginning of the World Summit on the Information Society, which was sort of labeled as an open summit in the UN tradition, and the very first sessions we discussed rules of procedures and among the governments. So the non-governmental actors started banging at the doors, and gradually the doors were opened and they were let in. And the second phase of the summit was by far more open than the first phase. Or when you look at the very controversial World Conference on Internet Telecommunication Rules in Dubai, the ITU actually opened a treaty negotiation to non-governmental actors as observers, which was unheard of in a UN context before. So we see there has been a change over time. And I think the IGF played an essential role in that, in influencing other organizations. The OECD before did not let in civil society. Then they thought, actually, this works quite nicely in the IGF. Why don't we experiment? In 2008, they created a truly multi-stakeholder ministerial conference. The same with the Council of Europe. So there is an evolution in place, and I think governments realize it helps them make the better decisions if they let in the voices who maybe have different opinions. But it's an upstream influencing of a decision-making process. And again, to the a lot of the discussions are about international norms, but much of what happens in internet governance is indeed at the local level. And I love quoting the CEO of RIPE, Axel Pavlik, who is present in this room, who once I heard him say, good internet governance begins at home, and that is very true. If governments actually talk to their stakeholders to have a good policy in place, to listen to their input, then they end up making the better policy. And I once talked to a regulator in Kenya who have actually a very bottom-up procedure there, and I was amazed that he actually participated in list discussions, and he said, well, it hurts sometimes, but it helps us take better decisions. And I think that's a very good example of an enlightened government official who actually listens to the input coming from the bottom in a truly bottom-up inclusive way. And lastly, let me refer to the broader concept of the Internet Governance Forum and the link to the national and regional IGF initiatives. I think there is a increased feeling that we need to better integrate all these processes, improve and enhance the linkages. And allow me to make a sales pitch for the IGF Support Association. We do support national and regional IGF initiatives such as SEEDIG with precisely this objective to help improve linkages between the regional initiatives and the global dialogue. And we hope that in the end, the input will come bottom up from the regions to shape the global discussions and not the other way around, that the regional and national initiatives pick up an agenda that is set by the global discussions. No, I think it would make more sense if it bubbles up from the bottom. And again, the sales pitch, I would invite all of you to join as members the IGF Support Association. By showing your support, you strengthen the overall movement of the IGF. It's not just the financial contribution that matters, it's the showing the moral and the political support for the broader IGF community.
Thank you, Markus. And just for clarity, SEEDIG is a sub-regional IGF initiative itself, and we are benefiting from support from the IGFSA. So if you contribute to that, you actually contribute to SEEDIG. So thank you. Andrea, back to you, because Frédéric mentioned the IANA transition and how multi-stakeholderism worked there. Maybe you can explain briefly and very general.
Yeah. Okay, I will try. So the IANA transition is indeed a cool case of how the multi-stakeholder model works and can deliver. Actually, it was kind of a test of how successful can be the multi-stakeholder model. Because if you look at the other examples, the very same fact that ICANN with the other organization manages the logical layer of the internet so that you are able to connect and find the computer that you are looking for, that's already an example of multi-stakeholder model at work. But the challenge was, okay, can we scale it up to another level? And in this case, the level was almost, if you want to say, if you want to see, it's almost a kind of constitutional drafting level. Because what the IANA process did is basically was to take the basic legitimacy of ICANN and its model, a contract that one government, the United States government, signed with one organization that was created by this government, by the way, to manage this important layer. And to move from this place to a place where you have the whole community in charge of the supervision, so the whole community takes the role that before was taken by one government and not one major government, was done through a process that was completely open. It was extremely lengthy and messy at points, but one of the key principles was to be inclusive. And at the end, had to go through the test of something that Markus once said, of making everybody equally unhappy. So, and allow me the copyright for that. Well, actually, through negotiations and coming to a continuous and an iteration of proposals, you redraft key principles and processes of how to structure the supervision of this layer. That's basically at its core what the IANA transition was all about. But the powerful meaning of this was that that was all done through the multi-stakeholder model, and then was presented to the US government by the community, and said, so here you can also see like the historical value of that, because the US government set up this organization and said, by the way, this organization is multi-stakeholder. But nonetheless, I'm keeping this contract because it's important and I want to be sure that no one is messing with that. So there was a little fallacy there, okay? And now the US government is receiving proposals that take them out of the picture. I mean, they're still part of this process, but not as a primus inter pares, but as one of the other stakeholders, and takes it from the hand of the whole community. And now this proposal that has been developed during 2 years, I have a slide with all the numbers of emails and hours of phone calls. It's something staggering. Is now in the hand of the US government. It has 60 to 90 days to look through these proposals and first of all make sure that the proposal makes sense and is viable, but at the same time they cannot discard the fact that this proposal comes from the very same model that they set as the guiding star of this layer of the internet. So now the burden is on them. But what was achieved by this process in the community is something that can probably, and I think if successful, will mark a turning point on what the multi-stakeholder model can do. So far we say, yeah, multi-stakeholder model works in managing the logical layer of the internet, but then when you move up, probably it doesn't work. Well, we moved up quite a little bit with the IANA process, because if you look into the process, it's really like writing a constitution where you see who has the power, who controls who has the power, which are the mechanisms to ensure that who has the power is accountable, and it goes into very, very fine details. And that was done in a way that was never done before. If you take any other single country or institution, the basic rules are always written by a few. Yes, the few are elected or not elected, or they come from divine, blessing. But at the end, it's only a few, and it's always closed. In this case, it was all open. It's all open under the sun, and that's something extremely powerful. And I think it also builds up on another success of the multi-stakeholder model, which was Net Mundial. We go into some other issues here and more acronyms and more big conferences, but I think it follows that line. If it's the next step of the multi-stakeholder model, moving from the simple management of the names, numbers, and protocols into something else.
Thank you, Andrea. Do we have comments or questions from the room? We do.
Thanks. I wanted to draw attention to one particular challenge when it comes to multi-stakeholder model. When we are talking about a lot of policies, a lot of digital policies or internet-related policies can be made on a soft level without decision, as we could see in without kind of a conventional way of bringing decisions, as we could see in ICANN model and so on. But at some points, and you mentioned rightly the Net Mundial, it boils down to bringing a decision. Even on a national level, adopting a national strategy on information society or whatever it is a decision ultimately. So on that level, we usually ask whether the governments should bring the decision, and there were discussions on that, or it should also be a multi-stakeholder model. One of the challenges there shows to be the representativeness of non-government stakeholders. So when it comes to civil society, and Net Mundial is a good example, there is always a problem who is represented civil society. Because you have so many organizations, there is no election process, there is no kind of democracy in that. And this kind of representativeness is quite a big challenge, unlike with the governments where we know who we elected, whether we liked it or not. So this is one of the challenges that needs to be kept in mind when the decisions are there. And I heard in some of the IGF discussions, a good way to understand that the multi-stakeholder model is not actually a replacement for democracy. It's a kind of an update, it's a kind of a patch. So we still, if we still believe our governments, that's again another issue, we still believe that when it comes to decisions, it will be the governments bringing the decision, but it's about the shaping process of those decisions that is the key. And then the formal decision is not the problem. And then the second thing is that hopefully most of the things do not need to be done in a conventional way through decisions. You have so many things that can be done through cooperation, awareness raising, capacity building, the certs as one example of cooperation when it comes to cybersecurity and so on. So there is more and more decisions that can be made in a softer way. Thanks.
Thank you, Vlada.
It is actually interesting that Vlada almost read my mind, Tatiana Tropina again from Max Planck Institute. I want to confirm what Andrea from ICANN told. I mean, believe me, I participated in this process. It's not only just words. For anyone who was questioning multi-stakeholder model, it was a big stress test of the model itself. And it was incredible because it did show how mature actually multi-stakeholder model can be on the ICANN level. Because once we got this accountability proposal approved in Marrakesh, which made the transition proposal complete, it was an interesting feeling of being unhappy and happy at the same time, because compromise didn't make anyone happy, but what made everyone happy was, first of all, that everyone could participate, and everyone who wanted their voices to be heard they got it. But what Vlada told, I mean, ICANN has this mature multi-stakeholder model because it actually has the structures for representation. It has, for example, generic name supporting organization which is dealing with the development of policy concerning generic top-level domain names. And, for example, non-commercial users constituencies is a part of it. It has end users constituencies. So it has the structure to make, you know, these bottom-up processes actually working. Of course, you can come from the outside and say, like, hey, I'm Tanya Tropina, and that's how I came to accountability. I wasn't belonging to any constituency, and I was just trying to find my way. But anyway, you can come from the outside. But again, when it comes to the national level, for example, or regional level, it's what Vlada told. What is the issue of representation, first of all? And secondly, if we are talking about multi-stakeholder model and equal footing and bottom-up processes being the how to say, the ground rules for these. In some of the parts, it probably will not work. In some of the parts which are perceived like cybersecurity a sovereignty issue, or which are discussed behind the closed doors. So there are two issues. First of all, representation. Who represents civil society? Who represents end users? And what are the mechanisms? So maybe ICANN and what happened at the ICANN can be a good model to be implemented also on the policy level by the governments and civil society organizations and businesses to see how it can work. Because otherwise we can talk about multi-stakeholder model for a long time, but if we don't have actual mechanisms in place, as ICANN has, this multi-stakeholder model for internet governance will not be mature.
Thank you very much. My name is Emir Pavlakic. I'm from Communication Regulatory Agency from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Convergence Regulatory Authority, but I'm also Vice Chair of the Steering Committee on Media Information Society. I would like to draw you the line to see in our example how we see the internet governance. I think that we all need to be aware that we have a standard setting that we established in the Council of Europe in the CDMCI. One of the main tasks ours is internet governance and information society as well. But building the strategy and the documents that we are dealing, we need to implement that on the field. In our concrete case that helped in our first national IGF because we wanted to see how those standards could be implemented and what we can do. We had great opportunity from the NGO who was very interested in the very beginning, but unfortunately they didn't have strength till they meet the government and other multi-stakeholders to establish, to start that. Multi-stakeholderism is the approach that we're using in the CDMCI on the Council of Europe level, but also on the national level. That's the answer on your question. That's the only way how can we do something or actually get some conclusions, further recommendations. Of course, we need to be transparent when we establishing new laws, the documents that we need provide. But let me tell you on the other side the importance between links these two organizations, because also on the CDMCI level we are looking forward for the implementation on the national field. We need how those documents that we produce are implemented in each country, and each country is different, so we want to have that and share that experience within the Council of Europe to go in which direction we should go actually together with the national level. And I hope so that we will try to achieve that also in our second IGF that we are planning also to have in October. A lot of interesting issues that we are discussing on the Council of Europe level, on the national levels, regional as well, but I think also the general audience is also very interested in that. So we are open as a national IGF, and that's from the very beginning we were make clear that we want to include everyone. Each NGO is welcome. Whoever has interest, each government, we are trying, since there is also the government representatives, we are trying to select which ministry or which agency could help us dealing with concrete issue. I think this is very important. Thank you.
Thank you also. Valentina?
Okay, boring me. I would like to thank and to continue on the line from Vladimir and Emir. Legitimacy for civil society, even more the representation. I think civil society know that we cannot represent the people. We can be legitimately be one of the voices. But I would like to bring the same parallel into the business society. Because we always focus on the big business, the big Google, the big Facebook, the big IBM, and so on. But the business community is not a unique block. You have a small ISP provider, you have a small enterprise. This is what we want to highlight in the second IGF. How this little national business community can have a say. And also you have business community which are clearly capitalistic oriented, the profit for the one and the other works. But you have also more cooperatives or a social organized business, which is their say. So I think that the issue of legitimacy, even if it's more visible on civil society, because everyone expects that the people are more accountable than governments, you know. We know that governments, even if we elect, they have some fails. But we expect from the people an integrity that it's not really in the human, because, you know, civil society, it's very large definition. It's just one way of formalizing people's voices. But I think that we need to bring the issue of legitimacies into the business community, and I think that this is why it's important, all these fora that are regional and national, to give the possibility to the small business, the business that are overruled by the big business and by the government. In Bosnia, the little ISP provider once had been asked to be the policeman of the day, the police person of the day. So a big telecom can say no to a government. A little ISP provider will have to say yes, of course, or have to shut down its door. I think we needed to challenge legitimacy in each and every one of the stakeholder community, academy and the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina. Do we have any other comment or question from the room? Would you want to add, Markus?
Thank you. No, it's a very interesting discussion, and the question of legitimacy of the non-government actors has been with us, I think, since the beginning. The government representatives say, we are legitimate, we have a mandate from our people, and these don't have a mandate, and who are they? And be that business, be that civil society. But I use the term participatory democracy, I think. Essentially, as long as you're open and inclusive and allow the voices to come in through wherever they are, and the government can listens actually to these voices, then I think we do have a process in place. And Vlada mentioned the distinction between decision shaping, decision making, and I think that comes very much into it. I often used to say the IGF is not a decision making forum, but it is a decision shaping forum. The decisions may be taken elsewhere by those who have a mandate to take decisions. In the internet world, yes, that would be ICANN, and here with my ICANN hat on, I would totally echo what Andrea said about the amazing process, and Tatiana, the amazing process we went through. Tatiana also made the point that ICANN has a mechanism in place to bring in the actors. That is indeed very true. But I don't think we have to go that far as finding mechanism as complex as the ICANN structures are, and they are very complex, in order to have a bottom-up multi-stakeholder process. I think there are ways of coming to a decision, soft law and more softer ways. And again, I would very much like to echo what Vlada said. Not everything has to be a hard decision by a government, but I think by having a multi-stakeholder, bottom-up, inclusive process that allows all voices to be heard, we help shape decisions that are better decisions, because they bring up all the points that are discussed from the different parts of society. And I heard, for instance, in the IGF context, business representatives say, this is actually useful for us to discuss to civil society, to hear concerns before we develop a product, because we may end up developing a product nobody wants because of this or that reason. It infringes on privacy feeling. So also for business, this is very useful to have an upstream discussion of what people actually want. And I come from a country, I'm a citizen of Switzerland, where we have practiced multi-stakeholder democracy for over 100 years. We have referendums on any law people don't like, and that forces the government to actually proactively engage all stakeholders, be that farmers, be that trade unions, be that churches, before they go to Parliament with and present a law So there's already a consultative process in place that is very elaborate, and if people don't like the result, then they go to a vote. Now, not every country may adapt the same process, but I think internet governance is very close in the logical layer that we have a very open and inclusive democratic process, and by actually transporting that into the other layers, I think it really helps to create better decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. Chris, you wanted to add?
I think Markus actually covered a lot of what I was thinking. I think it is a really important issue, the representativeness of these stakeholder groups, and I think I'm really glad that we're talking about not just in the civil society context, that is reflected in other stakeholder groups as well. And it does reflect, I think, a bit, as I said, the somewhat artificial nature of these silos, that, you know, we use them and they're very useful in shaping and processing this discussion, but at the end of the day, a lot of people fall into different stakeholder groups. People within one stakeholder group have very different opinions. I think there's a couple of points that it's worth sort of keeping in mind in thinking about this, and one of them is that when we talk about who represents who, and we sort of imply that they have some sort of power in the decision making, and I guess they do, but what we don't want to do is try to recreate a voting structure that we might see in a sort of international governmental organization. That sort of decision making process, I think, doesn't work in a multi-stakeholder sense necessarily, and it comes back to Frédéric's first point of the day here, that consensus is the real key word that we see in internet governance. A decision made based on consensus, ideally, and it doesn't always work this way, but ideally shouldn't rely on one voting block winning out over another voting block. It should be about a process where we identify issues, we discuss those issues, we come to solutions that perhaps make everyone equally unhappy, but that those issues have been considered and addressed, and we can move forward with the decision one way or another.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else on the panel? Frédéric, please.
Yeah, I would like to second what Chris just said. We address rightly legitimacy. I believe we all said here in this panel that inclusiveness and transparency was really important criteria in the model. The model might not be perfect, but at least we work on this. Something we haven't addressed is, from a civil society perspective, we also need to recognize that it might be difficult for some people from civil society to compromise. And why should they, by the way? They come with very strong values, human rights values, or something they're really strongly believing, and then they face themselves in a process which is a consensus-based process, and Chris rightly spotted it. It might make everybody unhappy, but this is sometimes a good consensus when we come up. So this is one of the issues, but this is behaviors, this is practices that we still develop. Model might not be perfect, but really, I believe that the model might just apply to nearly everything, everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea, do you want to add something?
No, I mean, if you look at the IANA process and the transition, I think the legitimacy will come once this process is finished, once we get into the end of the contract that the US government has with ICANN to manage the critical resources. And that's 31st September 2016, so a few weeks away. And if the proposal goes through, as I hope and I believe will, then you get big legitimacy to the multi-stakeholder model, because you really have a test that it does work, it does deliver, and it delivers to the country that championed this model, set up this technology, and then kind of played in the background a bit. And it may well be also the moment where other actors and at the other layers of the internet governance start looking at this model. And as I was mentioning before, living in Brussels, not only now you're going through the hardship of having militaries downstairs your office, but also you have the exposure to what is making the policy agenda of the European Union. And since I started living in Brussels and working for ICANN, I saw how digital single market, regulation of the platforms, they now get into the highest level of the political agenda in Brussels, not as high as the migrant crisis of the Greek debt crisis, but they are there. But we are also seeing that the answers to those challenges, they're not there. Also in the other issues, they're not there, actually. Probably the multi-stakeholder model can be of help, can be a solution. The IANA process is putting that on the map at an higher level, on another level. So I believe that in the coming years we will see more of this model being adopted or being looked at by new actors to deal with challenges that the internet is providing us every day, and will continue evolving, and probably will be also interesting to see how at the national level it will be more and more implemented and used. So that was my point.
Thank you, Andrea. We don't have much time left of the session, but I would want us to go briefly through internet governance at national level. And going back to the survey, we had some questions about this specific topic. What is internet governance at a national level? And one of the questions was, what are the most challenging internet-related issues in your country? And I'm hoping you can see the screen. The top three were privacy and data protection, digital divide in its various dimensions, and cybersecurity as the top challenges at national level in countries in our region. We had 16 countries responding to this survey, so this is quite impressive. Going to the next slide. We had some other specific examples which were not listed in our responses. We had access and empowerment, net neutrality, CCTLD policies, more human rights, rule of law, e-democracy, and raising awareness, taking us back to the purpose of SEEDIG. And this is a pretty interesting slide, I think. Are there efficient and effective mechanisms in place at national level to address the identified internet-related challenges? 40% of respondents said no, and another 40% said they are not sure. And I think that says a lot, and I don't need to explain anything more. And the next question was whether there are efficient and effective mechanisms in place to address the identified challenges with examples of what's wrong or how things are working. And although we had those answers before on the slide, people were also giving us examples of multi-stakeholder internet governance mechanisms working at national level. So we have some Internet Governance Forum initiatives, and we have heard about the Bosnian IGF, and multi-stakeholder mechanisms like CCTLD registries, and again we've heard about the .rs model. And we have another example here. I would like Liana to tell us a bit about the Internet Governance Council in Armenia, which is a multi-stakeholder entity.
Yes, hello. This is Liana Galsian speaking from Armenia. Yes, we do have an Internet Governance Council, which is a multi-stakeholder entity, and it was actually initiated its formation from ISOC Armenia. And our member, our Vice President, Grigory Sagyan, and another member, Vice President Gagi Grigoryan. He is a member of government working in Ministry of Transport and Communication. And with the efforts of our members, we initiated a great dialogue talks of necessity to have a multi-stakeholder entity in a country, and we would like to have all the voices heard in one entity so that it will be not a forum which will gather once a year or once in 2 years and whatever time and have some discussions without any decision making, but will be a body which will work permanently. And so that the common people will know that for any internet-related issue, they can know who to address these issues. They can come and discuss, raise their problems on internet-related anything. And there will be some discussion, and those who are interested and who have some mandate to decide, they can do some decisions. They can have some mechanisms to exploit all of that thoughts. So we have formed it in the end of 2014. So we have that IGC, Internet Governance Council, worked only for a complete year last year. We had successful meetings, and one of the actual results was the organizing of Armenian IGF, ARMA-IGF, and this year we are going to have it on October. And that mechanism is not still so good working, but it's a start, and we need to make information, to raise awareness within a community that there is a body, that people can come with their issues, and those people in that entity can discuss and even make it work within a country.
Thank you, Liana. So what we wanted to point out with these examples is that multi-stakeholder internet governance actually does exist at national level as well, not only international or global level. And we have examples in our region, so we can look at ourselves also and try to be better and not only participate in national internet governance mechanisms, but also the regional and the global one. I think we are more or less at the end of the session, so I would go back to our key participants and ask for some final comments from you. National internet governance, you are all present more or less in our region, so maybe you can tell us a few words about that. Frédéric, ISOC chapters.
You were looking at me, I thought you were looking at, I have not my glass, so I have an excuse, so sorry for this. Look, first, I'm really enthusiastic when I hear the level of understanding here in this room when we discuss about very complex issues in a very high level manner. So what does it say about here, the region, and the fact that you organize it here? So people are really aware of this, and there is no coincidence that we see flourishing from Kiev to Yerevan to Belgrade to Sofia to Moscow, a lot of national IGF. So it's really a very active region for this, and this is no coincidence. We need to recognize indeed that, of course I mentioned the fact that it started already in 2008 in OECD. The highest level is maybe more easier to put in place because of, you know, you are high level where you go local, you got constraints, including time constraints, where policymakers want to take a decision in the next coming 6 months. The OECD review took 2 years. Sometimes it's a bit too long for policymakers. So there are lots of different constraints. Yet the Yerevan example that has just been given by Liana is another evidence that it's possible. So I see things coming strongly. There are different models of national IGF. The way it has been organized in Yerevan differ from the Moscow one, yet they are both valid. So I'm very optimistic when I see those many local IGF flourishing, and we're here to help because there are high level consciousness here in this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Frédéric. Chris?
I'll keep it quite brief. I would just come back to what was said earlier and what I've said earlier about the connection between stakeholder groups. I think it is really encouraging to see how much interest there is in national level internet governance activity in this part of the world. I would encourage anyone who's involved with that, who's doing that, to talk to RIPE NCC, talk to ISOC, talk to ICANN, try to use us where you can to get all of those stakeholders, including the technical community, including the operators, including, you know, internet startups in your country involved alongside the civil society and government players. Yeah, we're happy to help.
Thank you, Chris.
Along the same lines, when we started the IGF, the national and regional IGF initiatives were not part of the plan, but they just came because there was an appetite for that kind of dialogue, and that's great to see and very encouraging. And I think the Armenian example is a very good example on how to take it a next step to a next level higher, to have a permanent body, multi-stakeholder body dealing with these issues. And like the other speakers, the IGF Support Association is happy to support these initiatives.
Thank you, Markus. Andrea?
Okay, thank you. So in my work at ICANN, I happen to deal mostly with Southern European countries. So it spans from Portugal to Bulgaria and Romania. This morning I was coming from another hotel and I was walking and I was feeling how close I am when I'm here to my hometown in Rome. So I could see cars parked on the sidewalks, tram drivers driving through the traffic, speaking on the phones, good-looking girls around, sunny and beautiful. But then one thing that I yet haven't seen, neither in Italy, something in Spain, something in Portugal, is this interest, is this factual implementation of multi-stakeholder model, events like this one, or the events that Donck before mentioned, and or the representative from the government that said here before it, we are looking to be on the European map. And I think you have way more chances and possibility to do that because you are trying to innovate governance than countries that pride themselves for being the founding fathers of the European Union, but then they are stuck and locked into a very old-fashioned way of looking at the internet and looking at the governance is. And I'm amazed, and as I said, take advantage of us, take advantage of the ICANN model, but don't be shy, don't think that you always have to look at some other countries. I think what you're doing here is something that many other countries in Europe, they dream of. And if countries from this region are successfully implementing policies, and they are in the management of this layer of the internet, but probably scaling up to the other layers of the internet, they will be really jumping ahead of the 28, let's say not all of them, but most of them, or the one that pride themselves as the most advanced countries in Europe, that so far from my experience are still not seeing how these challenges can be addressed through this model. So congratulations, and keep going with the differences from here in Italy.
Thank you, Andrea. All right, we are ready to go to the final part of the session, which is the wrap-up and the messages. As you have probably seen on our website, each session at SEEDIG should end with some messages. And Anna, you are kindly asked to read us some messages, and we will ask for your endorsement for those messages. Anna, are we ready? We can show them, all right. And meanwhile, many thanks to our key participants and many thanks to you all for contributing to the discussions. Anna?
I still wait. Before the keynotes will be presented on the screen, I'll tell you how we did it last year, how I did it last year. So I would present the notes that I gathered during the session, the keynotes, and then I would like to ask you to give me your endorsement in a Hemingway, which means, or clapping, whatever what do you prefer? Hemming? Okay. Or clapping? Clapping? Hemming? Hemming. Okay, we all agree? Okay. Oops. Who?
You might want to use your computer. Technology is, well, a bit tricky at times. No, using her computer as in reading from it.
Okay. It's okay. So it's mine, right? Yeah. So, let's get started. The first keynote I have is IG is evolving with time. IG meaning Internet governance. This evolution of Internet governance means and makes the main actors be more open and inclusive. Hemming? If you agree. If you don't agree, I don't hear any hemming. So you don't agree that Internet governance is evolving with time, and that makes also and means that the actors like ICANN or RIPE-NCC or any other main actors are evolving with the evolution of Internet governance. Now I see if I explain it in my way, in my words, I get it. So approved. Okay. The next point is the governance is still associated with the government, but at least government's policy making and regulation help to shape the governance, so the policy making. Shall I again explain it? So, the governance, like internet governance, is still associated with the government. That's the point that was raised many times. But we also agree that the governance is shaping the government, the policy making, the regulation. Now you're humming?
Regulations, right?
Repeat, Sorina?
I think it was more about the other actors shaping the policies and the regulations that are written by government. Maybe that would get a...
If you agree with the point of Sorina?
If not, we can move to the next point.
Okay, I think it's not passing. It's all right. Third point. Internet governance is mostly and mainly about dialogue and collaboration between different actors, and the consensus is the key word in internet governance. Very good. Fourth, there is no single main actor in internet governance. Governments are important, but not as important as users. Civil society is bringing up a lot of important topics, but it's further implemented together with other stakeholders. Okay. Fifth, multi-stakeholderalism is not a single model, but it's a set of practices, best practices, and behavior that helps to improve the governance process and makes more voices being heard. And participation and on equal footing and inclusiveness are the keywords of multi-stakeholderalism. Passed? I think so. Sort of. You? All good there? 6. And yeah, 6. Representativeness of stakeholder groups and the legitimacy is a matter of discussion in internet governance. But as long as we keep the processes open and inclusive, we can call the internet governance, the process multi-stakeholder. I think I will repeat it. So representativeness of stakeholder groups and legitimacy is a matter of discussion in internet governance, but as long as we keep the processes open and inclusive, we can call it multi-stakeholderal. Yeah, I think it's good. 7th, better global internet discussions should be shaped in a bottom-up way, from national to sub-regional and all the way to global. Okay, I think it's also passed. I think we have, from 7 points that I presented to you, 6 of them were passed. So I'm taking out the 3rd note that was about governance and government, and yeah.
Thank you,
Anna.
The
rest I will leave it, and it will be, I think, published afterwards.
It will be on our website, and then it will go into the SEEDIG report, which will go to the IGF, to Eurodig, and to all other processes. Again, thank you all. Thank you, Anna. Thank you to our key participants, to our remote participants, and to the room. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sorina.
And we have a speaker's corner outside with some short presentation. We have a Bitcoin machine right there. We have many interesting things today. Welcome and enjoy.